Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be back with another phenomenal episode of the Career Coach RX podcast because this month we are celebrating a diverse group of women and we are talking about women holding their crowns and their heads very high. And our theme this month is Women Reign. And we are interviewing a diverse group of women from across different diverse career fields, women in entrepreneurship. And today is no different. We have an educator and entrepreneur. Her name is Yasha Chapman. She is the CEO and lead coach for Elementary Education Evolved. She is an accomplished educator with a rich background in various educational roles. Now, I had to move your bio up because I had to make sure I get this sentence in, Yasha. Yasha is Yasha's lifelong dedication showcases her unwavering belief in equitable education and empowering educators to ensure the success of every child. And today's topic is making the grade, women leaders shifting the narratives in K through 12 education. So I want to turn it over to our queen, Yasha. And Yasha, you share a little bit about yourself, your career experience, and what inspired you to get to where you are to do the work that you're doing today.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. As you stated, my name is Yasha Chapman, and I like to describe myself as an empathetic problem solver that is driven by passion and purpose. And that passion and purpose has obviously led me to the field of education, where my focus and my mission is to close the academic achievement gap for Black students. And so, regardless of my job title, whether because I've served as a classroom teacher, I've served as a curriculum coordinator, a curriculum writer, a tutor, an instructional coach, and now a consultant. But regardless of my title, my mission is the same. So in each position, it's always been to close gaps, to use instructional strategies and practices specifically for Black students that help increase engagement, that help increase social skills, that helps increase their academic abilities, and so on and so forth.
You know,
And
I
so what got
really.
me
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say what got me started in education was both of my parents. Both of my parents are actually educators, retired. My mom was a school social worker, and my dad was a pre-K advocate. And so, just seeing their work in education and the expectations that they put on me, very high expectations to perform and be a scholar. And so, that's what led to my passion, my path to education.
So you talk about what led to your passion and passion education. I'm gonna start the conversation outright because a couple of things you said I want to go back to, but to this point you just made about your parents, right? And the level of influence that they had on you deciding to go into this different career field. Now, I always get this disclaimer. I am talking about social impact stuff in our communities on this podcast because I am a social impact career coach, right? And I want to make sure that the people that we're bringing on, I'm highlighting folks that are in this month is women that are making a difference in the community. And one thing that you just mentioned is the influence of your parents that they had on your career. So when in the work that you do, even though you are engaged with teachers and other professionals in the classroom, how important is it for parents to be engaged in their child's education at an early age?
Oh wow. I mean, it's monumental. I believe my level of care for education came from my parents' involvement and their level of care. And so when I say level of care, I mean I had a standard. I could not bring in any grade below an 85. Period. If I brought in an 80, I'm on punishment. Because my mom is she's sitting me down. What is the problem? What's distracting you? You're better than this. You could perform at a higher level than this. If I had an 80, I'm in tutoring. And so just to see, they were always visible at my school events, not school events. Because again, my mom was a school social worker. So she would just pop up sometimes. Come volunteer, come check on me. And so just seeing their involvement and just seeing how much they cared, and just from day one, my mom always told me, after you graduate high school is college. So I didn't think of anything other than that, because that's what was planted in my childhood from the jump. So I would say parental involvement is key, especially for relationships with teachers, because as a teacher, I know firsthand that when I have a personal relationship with that parent, I'm going to work hard for students
Yeah.
regardless. But if I have that relationship with that parent, I'm going to go 10 times harder, because the relationship is there, because the expectation is there, because the level of care, or I understand a certain familial history, and I understand that family's plight and what they have to go through. And so parental involvement is key in your success as a teacher as well as your student success.
So you talked about earlier when you were kind of introducing yourself, and I have to make a joke here because I said, "Hey, Yasha, when you start out, give me, if you notice about the first 6 minutes, I ain't said anything. Then, let me jump in there. But as soon as you took a breath at 2 minutes, I was like, okay, you know. So thank but I was just so ready because it was certain things you said, right? You have a passion for working with our community, with students of African American background, right? Because as an educator, what have you noticed? Now, I'll share a little bit about myself. I taught I taught fourth grade for a few years. In the community where I served, it was in Del Rio, Texas, mostly Hispanic students. I felt like when we talk about underserved communities, my students face many of the same challenges that some of our students face because of the area where they live, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
that particular instance, it was a migrant community, and then I've also worked in a migrant community where it was like a farm community. But so, in the areas where you've taught and served, has it been urban, inner city communities? What is the population specifically that you served? And when you say some of the challenges that our students, meaning Black students, are facing, highlight some of those challenges and kind of share with me what was it like the classroom experience, like with the challenges that our children were facing.
So I've taught in predominantly urban areas. I choose to go to Title I schools. I
Mm-hmm.
choose to go where the demographic is majority Black students, because I know that's where the help is needed. And as far as what I've seen, I'm a military spouse, so I travel quite a bit. I move every 3 to 4 years, and so originally being from Georgia, I've had the experience of living in both North and South Carolina, as well as New York. I've done some work in Pennsylvania, and now here in California. And regardless of wherever I go, the trend for Black students is the same. They're underperforming, and the gaps are large and have not moved in the past 30 years. And so when I say underperforming, I'm inclusive of all things of reading comprehension, math skills, writing skills, for sure is a huge one. It's almost as if writing is exempt from curriculum nowadays, as if
They're not even
like
teaching
teachers.
cursive anymore because they so busy having to teach, the stuff for students to pass. This is a whole nother subject though. For passing
Yeah, but I
exams and
mean,
that.
I'm not even talking about cursive, but just writing, how to write a sentence, how to write a paragraph, narrative writing, grammar, capitalization, those key things. And so those are the trends that I notice Black children are struggling with, and of course behavior. But when I say behavior, I personally do not believe it is because they're just acting out. It is because the time has not been taken to understand that child, to build a relationship with that child. And so there are behavioral issues or just a lack of cultural competence in
Mhm.
understanding how to form that relationship and not see behavior as a negative behavior, and understand it to be just maybe this is just a part of this child's personality, and once you break through those walls you'll get a whole nother child. And so those are a lot of the trends that I see
Well,
and
I
I've
mean,
experienced.
to your point, I know that a lot of times with our children, they'll be diagnosed with, quick to diagnose them with something like ADHD, place our children in special education programs, and it's not necessarily always a need for that. But that's like the go-to thing. It's kind of like when we were talking about when I had the health summit and we were talking about the stereotypes and the thoughts of
Mhm,
like even in healthcare, right? The high pain tolerance, like it's just these stereotypes. Well, this person is acting out, just this automatic diagnosis. So you're
mhm,
dealing with all of these systemic issues within the
mhm,
education system. And so it takes
mhm,
leaders like you, Yasha, to be able to point out when these things are not going right. So let's say that I am I want to talk about what made you transition into this consulting piece, right? Because I've read your bio and some of the stats. So, but what I'm hearing though is something that I think needs to be pointed out. You've
mhm,
worked in New York. You worked in Georgia. You worked in Pennsylvania. You worked in California. You worked all across this nation in minority schools and Black
mhm.
schools, right?
Yes,
And you're
yes.
still seeing some of the same common denominators and challenges across the nation. So it's not like it's just, well, it's children that grew up in the South or children that grew up in this particular region. So when you talk about the common denominators, do you feel like that it is just not only the cultural competency within how we are delivering education to our children in that sense of connectedness? Because exactly what you say in terms of how we build that sense of connectedness in education is the same way that I would say to a healthcare provider, that level of cultural competency, cultural intelligence, that learning to really understand what that patient needs. And even though I don't want to look at children as patients, right, but it's that same level of conversation. So what is the missing piece here if we're looking at a person who has taught all across this nation and sees that same pattern? What is the
Mhm.
missing piece here that the bigger picture that folks are not understanding about what's happening with our children in the education system?
Mm. I would say it's three things. It's one, first, the belief that Black children can learn is missing. Empathy is missing. And thirdly, high expectations. So when we talk about it, high expectations, empathy, and the belief is all rooted in your mind. So the common trend is the mindsets of people working with Black students. They don't have the mindset or the belief that these children can learn and can succeed. They don't set high expectations for them because they don't believe that they can learn and succeed. And lastly, they don't have empathy. They don't put themselves in Black students' shoes to understand them and then to direct their instruction or plan their level of instruction by leveraging what they do know about these Black students and making it work for their benefit. Those three things are what is missing, in my belief, in my opinion, across the nation.
So we titled this, I said early on, the title of this podcast that was going to be Making the Grade, Women Leaders Shifting the Narratives. And this is why I want to point out to everybody, right?
Mhm.
Yasha is a person who has worked in the classroom, and she's had several different roles across the education sector, right? And I didn't hear you say that you were a preacher. I mean, a principal, but you are preaching. I didn't hear you say that you were a principal. I didn't hear you say that you were a school district superintendent. I didn't hear you say that you were the president. You are a teacher in the classroom who recognize the need to be able to support our students in a more culturally competent manner. And you shifted the way that you teach, and you developed teaching techniques that has really garnered some results. So when I'm talking about, guys, women leadership in the narrative, just know that if you're a teacher in the classroom, you're working in that school environment, it is really us as educators being in that classroom and engaging with parents one-on-one. We are the leaders, right? We are the leaders that are going to be people that are shifting the narrative. And so, Yasha, what techniques have you used? Because tell us a little bit about the techniques you use, the results that you garnered that made you shift into this. I am now doing consulting work and teaching other people the techniques that I've used.
So some of the techniques I use, it's a lot of small groups. I am very data informed to become data driven. And so before I'm allowing the data to drive my decisions, I'm first sitting with the data and understanding the bigger picture. What information is this data telling me? And I'm looking at both qualitative data as well as quantitative data. So qualitative, of course, meaning just general words based off of my students' experiences. How are they enjoying my lessons? How are they enjoying the examples that I implement? The examples that I implement are relevant to their everyday life. So I am in my second grade class, the last year that I taught second grade, had a lot of football and basketball players. My class was mainly male heavy. And so a lot of my math lessons incorporated football, incorporated basketball. We had basketball addition, basketball subtraction. And so they get up and move, they get to talk. A lot of their written assignments was peer feedback driven. So I'm putting the work and the responsibility on my students, giving them a voice, giving them a specific guidelines as to what you're going to hold your peer accountable for and if they met the objective for this lesson or not. So my students' feedback would come from their peers. It would not come from me. The only time I would interject is if I needed to, correct or clarify. So other strategies I use, like I said, small grouping, their likes, differentiation is a big one. And I think when teachers hear differentiation, they think, oh, that's so much work. not understanding that it's not necessarily it is the work that's a part of it, but differentiation is also the learning styles, whether you're just doing auditory learning, whether you're doing kinesthetic, whether you're doing a hands-on activity. So every week I use the combination of different learning styles within each of my lessons. That's differentiation as well. Just making sure that I'm using the data and I'm watching what skills they need. I'm planning my small groups, both language arts, reading groups, and math groups. Everything is based off of data, based off of how I taught. I had a standard in my class, just how my parents had a standard for me. My standard was 80%. So if 80% of my class did not perform 80% or higher, that was an automatic reteach. Nobody had to tell me that. I knew that because I had a set goal for my students and what level I wanted them to be on. Because again, high expectations. Students can rise to the level at which you expect them to perform at. If you set the standard here, they will perform here. If you set the standard low, that's where they will be. And so these are some of the strategies that I used hands-on. Like I said, I'm all over the place, but those are just some off the top of my head.
What you're saying is great. I mean, listen, there's a couple of things I want to ask you, because what you talked about there is the expectancy theory, but we're going to shift into, how you took what you are doing in the classroom and you started this business. But I still have to go back to something that you said, because it would be remiss of me if we didn't talk about the importance of culturally relevant education, right? Cultural competence is one thing, and sometimes people can't always master that, but you provided a good leeway here for culturally relevant education. What do I mean by that? You recognize that you had basketball players and all the sports fans in your class, right? And then you created a dynamic where those kids were able to relate to the concepts that you were teaching, because you were using this example. Sometimes I find, and I definitely want your perspective on this, that the miss in providing culturally relevant education. It's like we see people sending home math problems about John was a slave and he picked 5 apples, like pushing the narrative too far. When teaching kids about history, you using slave talk, it's like a little bit over the top with the narrative, right? And so what you have shown there is like, it doesn't have to be over the top. I was like, if you don't know a lot about me, a lot of people don't know about me, is that I am an American history professor in addition to my health science background. And I just remember, like in Florida, right, I've been watching them change the narrative of history, of like how certain things are taught. I almost feel like that slavery was going to be depicted as a workforce development program, the way that it was going at one time. And so we've seen instances where teachers are sending home, not just in Florida, but the examples that I'm using where it's supposed to be culturally relevant education, but you use an example like literally John was a slave, he picked 5 apples, and you know what I mean. So it doesn't have to go to that extent. It's really not that complex. Listening to your kids, and you just, okay, they like basketball, they like football, so I'm going to gauge it around that. And see, that kind of culturally relevant education, true, it applies to those children, but it could be black kids, white kids, yellow kids, purple kids in the classroom that like sports. So I just want to go back to get your perspective on, we're seeing people push the boundaries of culturally relevant education, but really it's just a matter of paying attention to what your students, what really engages your students, right? And what they connect with.
I'm so happy you shared, because honestly, that example speaks to not even culturally relevance. That's just cultural ignorance,
Right? To
right?
me, it's just culturally right.
It's just ignorance, because even as an educator, you have to do your due diligence and understand that Black history did not start with slavery. But that's another topic. And so I want to even get past that. I feel like what the majority of educators in our country do is when they hear or they see culturally relevant or culturally responsive, they see culture and think race, not realizing that culture is inclusive of traditions, it's inclusive of music, it's inclusive of religion, it's inclusive of a way of life. A way of life does not have anything to do with race, which is why you can pull from their lives as far as the extracurricular activities that they're involved in, which is why you can pull from just understanding that children like to move. Children do not like to be talked at all day. That's understanding the culture of children. And so it's really just understanding that culture is not limited to race. That is a reflection of one's mindset, again, their
Exactly.
beliefs, and it really highlights their ignorance, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'm glad that we backtracked to that because I just want people to understand that, right? It's about you paying attention to your kids and finding out what really is the connect. It does not mean that you have to dress up in a dashiki to
No.
connect with your children. Sometimes people miss the mark on cultural relativism and being able to relate. And then sometimes that kind of stuff can come out. It lets us know, one, as a teacher, to your point, you did not do your due diligence. I personally would never understand how you can be educated, and again, I think we can get on the soapbox here. You can be an educator, educated, and you're teaching, but you don't have the common sense to know maybe I shouldn't give this as a project to the students. Maybe I shouldn't ask this question, right? Maybe that's not actually culturally relevant, but I digress on that. But I think that it's an important point to folks who are listening in and you're trying to figure out how to do culturally relevant education, culturally intelligent education as with children. There's a culture of children. What do kids like, right? And what makes these kids, what fascinates these kids and gets them engaged. So
Right.
that's a whole nother sermon within itself. But I think that we did our due diligence in talking about it. Now, you took your experiences and you transformed that into this consulting practice because I see in your bio your this standard that you set for yourself. I also had to point that out too because you talked about the theory of expectancy. Even in your bio, you talk about this 80% achievement, right? Where you would go back and reteach. You didn't just let it fall by the wayside. So how did you take your successes in the classroom to get to the point where you are now, where you're running a consulting business, training other people to do what you did to get the same results?
So it started out, obviously, as a teacher, I saw the gaps I was able to close. I saw the stats. I saw how well my students were performing. And so I was thinking like, okay, well, if I can do this with 20 to 25 students, let me take it up a scale larger. Let me impact more students. And so that's what led me to becoming an instructional coach. And as an instructional coach, I had the privilege of leading a strategic plan for kindergartners that at the time when I took over, they were only at a 6% level of reading proficiency.
Wow.
Um, and after 6 weeks of implementing that strategic plan, our kindergartners went from 6% to 72% reading proficiency. And so that was another milestone in my career where I was able to see and able to actually close gaps on a larger scale. And so seeing that I was able to do it as a classroom teacher for 20 to 25, seeing I'm able to do it as an instructional coach for students 75 to 250, 300 kids, seeing that I can do it one-on-one with a small group if I'm tutoring, again, no matter where I'm at, I'm able to see that I have the skills. And so as an instructional coach, that led me into working with adults, giving them the tools, and then seeing them have success just gave me this light, like the light bulb went off and was like, especially personally as a military spouse, like it's a lot of hassle trying to get recertified in different states and things of that nature. And so it was like, just to skip the hassle of getting recertified, let me just start my own thing and let me just pour out into teachers who don't have this knowledge, because a lot of teachers, unfortunately, because of COVID, especially new teachers, they did not do their student teaching. And so some teachers did not even have like a classroom presence. And so we're talking about working with teachers from their foundational skills to how they plan, to how they do their grouping, to how they look at data, to how they look at students, to even their philosophy on education. And so if they're an adult and they're open to perfecting their craft, I am ready, willing, and open to pour in. So that's what led to that transition.
You're serving as a mentor. You're taking your experiences. And if I did not say earlier, I got because I have 62 jobs. I am in the military, so I do understand the experience. I'm a military officer, and so I do understand the experience of having to move around. And I love the fact that you had a passion for something, but you did not. You with your husband and family, but you took that passion that you have. You didn't necessarily leave it behind. You took a next step and you started into entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. But I would be remiss if I did not ask you about your experience as a woman, because you are a leader in education and you're facilitating this. Now, we naturally as women, we're nurturers, right? And so when you talk about these experiences that you have supporting other adults, when you have these experiences that you have um, talking to and supporting children, how has it been to really have your voice heard? Do you think, and it may be completely fine, do you think as if you were a male saying these type of things, is it easier to have your voice heard because you're a woman who has been in the classroom, or have you encountered any challenges, with like saying, hey, I can do this is what our kids need? What's your feedback on that? What has been your experiences?
Um, you know, in education, it is predominantly female. It's
Mm-hmm.
very female heavy, and so all of my principals have been women. Most of my leadership team has been women, and so in terms of having my voice heard, yes and no. And so this was shifted to like a whole nother dynamic, because with women, sometimes there's this competition.
Yeah.
There's
I'm very much about women supporting women. So I think that when we talk
Yeah,
about women reign, you don't need to be afraid to talk about that, right? Because as women, there's this in here, whether you say whether you say it or not, there is the inherent of wanting to compete, right?
yes,
And we talk
yes,
about being people of faith, and it's like if you believe that God has a
mhm,
path for you and you're on that path, then who is your competition? Why are we
right,
so difficult with each other, especially Black women? Why are we so difficult? That's a whole. We can talk about
right.
10
I
things.
was just going to say, even working with Black women, then you take it's competition, and then there's like a level of intimidation.
Right?
Um, I've experienced a lot of Black women feeling as if because I'm knowledgeable, I'm coming for their job. I don't
But
want
you're
your
not.
job.
You got your own company,
I have
right?
my
And
own job,
and that's
but
one of the things that can be a challenge within our community, right? How we do each other. I think it has to be
or
said.
just
What
not
this
even taking into the account, I have this experience from all of these other places.
is.
And so what it is that you're trying to accomplish, I've already done. And so sometimes women leadership aren't open to that, because you're showing, I feel like they take it as an attack on their competence when it's not. It's really like, take this idea, use it for the benefit of the greater good, and advance the
Exactly.
organization, advance the school, and just go about it that way. It doesn't have to be, well, I'm not using that because it came from you, or I'm gonna take your idea but I'm not gonna give you the credit for it. I mean, so I've dealt with a lot. I would say at times I do feel like my voice has been heard. More often than not, I find that I believe my role is to plant a seed.
Exactly.
And oftentimes I've realized I have not been privy to see that seed sprout and bloom, but I've
Hmm.
been able to witness it from afar and say, oh, I remember when I was there, that's not something they were doing, but now it is. And so I just hope that that's a reflection of the seed that was planted. And so in that case, I will say it's heard, my voice is heard. It may not be always what's spoken may not always be implemented right there in the moment, but I do believe that eventually, if the leader is willing to be reflective, eventually it is taken and it is implemented. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that we have to address that. I mean, and that could be a whole nother podcast episode, right? But when we talk about women reigning and being queens on our throne, we talk so much about, what is it like to in a male dominated society. But there are certain aspects like within healthcare, nursing, right? That's about 80% female.
Mm-hmm.
Education, that's pretty much female. You have a lot of men in leadership. Most of the folks that are in the classroom are going to be women. There's usually a
Right.
shortage of male. So we as women, when we talk about women supporting women, we can't just say it here on a podcast. We have to be real and say that sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. I feel like as women, when we get to the table, we have a responsibility to bring other women along and to open doors for other people. If you're truly a person of faith, I don't even care if you believe in a rock, whatever you believe in the universe, right? If you're truly a person of faith, I'm a person of I believe in God. When I say universe, I
Right.
say God. But when I say that, it's like if you truly believe that we can manifest and we can bring things for into our life, then there's nobody that's truly your competition. Now there's a certain level of ignorance, right? You're not gonna get as a business owner, you're not gonna get here on this podcast and share every secret, every technique that you teach because you own a business, right?
Right.
that's a difference, because then you're giving everything away for free. But you know that in the places and spaces that you dwell, that you are needed, you are necessary, and the knowledge and information that you're sharing is going to be useful, right? And even in those spaces and places where you just have been able to plant a seed, that's what you were being used for at that point in time. But
Right.
do think that we pointed out several issues today. We talk about the cultural relevancy of teaching our kids and cultural competency, because it's not just you being knowledgeable of cultural competence, right? It's being culturally relevant education. And as you
Right.
said, culture is not just about race, it's about what about the children, the culture of teachers, children, kids just like
Right.
certain things, right? And engage that way,
Right.
we don't get to some level of strength. And then in being meaningful in terms of how you are, if you question something that might sound a little silly or to the over the top,
Mhm.
maybe as an educated
Mhm.
person, you don't do that.
Mhm.
And then the other
Mhm.
piece is what we just talked about, right? About having our voices heard. When you get that seat at the table, you bringing that next generation along with you. And you mentioned that how you and that's something, Yasha, because I haven't worked in the K through 12. I did teach K through 12 last year, but long term it's been years, right? But I didn't even think about the experience of what a young person who was graduating as a new teacher coming out during COVID didn't get
Mhm.
to even go into the classroom. So,
Mhm.
thank you so much for all that you have shared. So, as we wind this up today and we talk about changing and shifting the narrative of as women, as leaders, as supporting each other, what what piece of advice do you want to share with our audience? What piece of last final words of wisdom? And then please do your shameless plug. Tell us where we can find you, any events that you have coming up, so folks can connect with you. Because I see you coming back on this podcast again, because there's so much depth into what you're saying, right? And we need to continue to have these discussions about what's happening in our classroom, what's happening with our children, and there can never be another day and another time, because it needs to be the discussions need to be taking place right now. So,
Right.
shifting the narrative. What's your final thoughts and words of wisdom?
Oh, wow. I would say in order to shift the narrative, you have to first shift your mindset. Everything is rooted in your mindset. So whatever you believe, that's what you will act on, that's what you will draw to you. And so in order to shift everything about that narrative, you must first shift your mindset. And I hope that your mindset is rooted in something that is pure and something that is purposeful and good and advances the world, especially if you are a woman in leadership that works with children in healthcare, in any field that you are responsible for the outcome of someone's life. Um, do your work, lead with love and intentionality, and that is how we shift the narrative.
And where can people, do you got any events that are coming up, Yasha, that you want to promote? And where can people find you across social media? Of course, we're going to include your social media information in the bio and all of that stuff and in our email blast. But where can people find you and connect with you immediately? And what events do you have coming up?
You can find me, of course, for more information, visit my website at www.lmedevolved.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook under the same handle, Elementary Education Evolved. If you want to look me up personally on Instagram, my name is Yasha_Chapman. And on those sites is where all of my events and upcoming trainings that I will be doing for new teachers. I will soon be releasing a membership page and platform. And so I will be doing live webinars and professional development training as well as group coaching very, very soon. So all of that information will be posted on my website and on my social media pages.
So Yasha is an example of one of those more serious conversations that we have here on the Career Coach RX podcast, because as an educator, I have to, bring on folks that are going to talk about some of these dynamics and things that are in the community. So when we talk about social impact, guys, Yasha is a true example. So don't, I mean, and we can go on and on about how that's a whole nother stuff. I think we have said 32 times in this podcast. That's a whole nother subject of how you transition out of education and started your own business, right? But we commend you, Queen. Wear your crown and hold your head high. And we appreciate it, all you're doing for our children and for our communities. We're definitely going to have you back at some point, because I really love the narrative of discussing education and connecting teachers and connecting folks who are listening in with, as parents listening in, you should know, how your children are being engaged in the classroom. And again, culture does not always mean race. Is the teacher really actually building connections with the child based on the things that are actually relevant to your child's life and things that they enjoy? So thanks again for joining us today on the Career Coach RX podcast. You can find us across all social media at Career Coach RX. You can find us on the website at careercoachrx.com. Career Coach RX is the service line of Work Solutions LLC, WORXK Solutions. We are the prescription for modern day careers and workforce success. Thank you for tuning in, Dr. Christy Taylor, and you have a great day.